So, you know how the Canadian economy, for the most part, seems to be hitting the brakes? Well, there's one province where the labor market has been telling a totally different and honestly a pretty surprising story. Today, we're going to dig into the numbers and see what's going on in Quebec. How did it become this resilient outlier? And the big question is, can it actually last?
Here's how we're going to break it all down. First, we'll get a feel for Canada's cooling job market. Then, we'll jump back to 2024 to see the solid foundation Quebec built for itself. After that, we'll get into the tale of two markets, look at the pressures coming down the pike, and finally, wrap up with what you need to be watching in 2025.
All right, let's dive in. To really get why Quebec's story is so interesting, we first have to understand what's happening across the rest of the country. And in 2025, that story is really all about some serious economic headwinds. By the middle of 2025, you started seeing headlines like this one. And you could just feel the anxiety growing. You know, all this talk about tariffs and trade wars, especially with the US, it wasn't just talk anymore. It was starting to have a real, measurable impact on jobs. And boy, do the numbers back that up. The national economy lost 66,000 jobs in August. And that wasn't just a one-off bad month either. It came right after another 41,000 jobs were lost in July. The trend was, well, it was pretty clear, and it wasn't good. All of this activity pushed the national unemployment rate up to 7.1%. And to give you some context here, if you ignore the crazy numbers from the pandemic, that's the highest it's been in almost 10 years. So yeah, the labor market was really feeling the squeeze. Okay, so it's that really tough national picture that makes what was happening in Quebec so remarkable. The province just seemed to be on its own path, and a huge reason for that was the incredibly strong foundation it built all the way through 2024. So let's talk about that foundation. How did Quebec do it? Well, the data from 2024 really tells the story of how the province managed to set itself apart and kind of brace for the storm that was coming. Okay, so this table right here, this tells a really powerful story about what was happening in people's wallets. Yeah, job growth was solid at 1%, but check this out. The two numbers that really matter, average wages, they grew by 4.5%. At the same time, inflation, the cost of everything, only went up by 2.3%. What does that mean? It means people's paychecks were growing almost twice as fast as the cost of living. That's real money, real purchasing power in their pockets. And here's the kicker. It wasn't just about the number of new jobs. The Institut Québec pointed out that these were high-quality jobs. We're talking full-time positions, and they were in these booming, well-paid sectors like finance, insurance, tech, you name it. This built a really robust and stable base for employment. So that strong foundation from 2024 created a completely different reality for Quebec when the rest of the country started to slow down in 2025. It really sets up this tale of two markets when you look at the most recent numbers. Just take a look at these unemployment rates for August 2025. You've got the national average climbing to 7.1% and Ontario hitting 7.7%. And then there's Quebec, holding way lower at just 6.0%, a huge difference. And this chart just drives the point home perfectly. While Ontario and Canada as a whole saw jobs actually disappear in August, Quebec, well, it bucked the trend entirely. It actually added a few jobs. I mean, it was holding its own while everyone else was taking on water. But here is the million-dollar question. Can this actually last? Because despite this amazing performance, Quebec isn't totally immune to what's going on. There are some serious long-term pressures building up that could really challenge its special status. The first big one is demographics. Think of it like a pipeline. You've got this massive wave of 1.2 million baby boomers who are about to retire, heading for the exit. But at the other end of the pipeline, there just aren't enough young workers coming in to replace them. And the projections say that gap isn't even going to start to close until 2031. That's a huge structural problem. So, this leads us to a kind of nerdy but really important economic idea called the beverage curve. So for the last little while, Quebec had this huge safety cushion made up of tons and tons of help-wanted signs. When the economy cooled a bit, companies just took down some of those signs, but they didn't have to actually lay people off. Well, the beverage curve is now telling us that cushion is basically gone. So from now on, any slowdown isn't just going to mean fewer job postings, it's going to mean real job losses and higher unemployment. The stakes are higher. And if that wasn't enough, you've got policy changes too. Both the federal and provincial governments are starting to tighten the rules on temporary immigration. Now, whatever the reasons for those policies, one of the big economic effects is that it shrinks the pool of available workers, the very same people who helped fuel all that recent growth. So you've got demographics, economics, and policy all coming together at once. What does this all mean for the year ahead? Well, here are 5 absolutely critical things you've got to watch that will decide if Quebec's labor market can stay this resilient.
First, U.S. tariffs. Will the trade war hit Quebec's massive manufacturing sector? Second, immigration. How will those new rules affect industries that are already desperate for workers? We'll also be watching to see if huge construction projects, like the ones from Hydro-Quebec, can act as a shield for the economy. And then there are 2 big public sector questions. Can health reforms finally fix the staffing crisis? And will the government's need to balance the budget mean they have to hit the brakes on public sector hiring?
You see, every single one of those issues is a major wild card. How they all play out and interact with each other is going to write the next chapter of this story. And it leaves us with that one central question. With all these pressures mounting from inside and out, can Quebec's labor market really keep defying gravity? Or is it finally going to get pulled back down with the rest of the country? It's going to be one of the most fascinating economic stories to watch.